Dinah Waverly made the call the way she made every decision that mattered, quietly, without ceremony, and without the slightest acknowledgement that what she was doing might be wrong. She had arranged the documents on the kitchen table of her Point Grey home, the forged emails, the photographs that looked exactly like her son's, but weren't. The letter composed in a careful approximation of Colton's handwriting, and she set them in front of her daughter-in-law with the calm of someone delivering a weather report. Then she folded her hands, looked across the table, and said the things she had rehearsed and meant, "I think we both know what's best for Colton." Leila Montrose had been 10 weeks pregnant when she sat at that table. She didn't know it yet. She would find out 2 days later in the bathroom of the apartment on Kingsway, staring at a test strip while the November rain hit the window, the way it always hits in Vancouver, like it intends to stay. 3.5 years later, Colton Waverly walked into a café in Gastown on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and the first thing he saw was his own eyes looking back at him from a small boy in a wooden high chair. If you're new to Ivory Secrets, welcome. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one, and drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the country and beyond. Colton had not eaten lunch outside his office in over a year. He had a dedicated assistant, a catering contract with a local restaurant group, and a schedule so precisely managed that mealtimes were blocked into his calendar the way meetings were. He ran Waverly Technologies from the 41st floor of a building on Burrard Street in downtown Vancouver, a company that had grown from a Series B startup into a $2.1 billion infrastructure platform in under 8 years, mostly on the back of Colton's particular combination of methodical intelligence and the kind of stubborn refusal to accept that a problem couldn't be solved. He was not the type of man who walked out of board meetings. He did it anyway that Tuesday. He could not have explained what happened. He had been sitting at the head of the table in the boardroom on 41, listening to his chief revenue officer walk through a partnership proposal that was objectively worth his attention, and somewhere in the middle of a slide about projected Q3 adoption rates, something inside Colton simply stopped. Not drifted, stopped. He had looked at his own hands on the table and thought, with startling clarity, I have been in this exact room, at this exact table, making this exact face for 8 years, and I have nothing to show for it that isn't on a spreadsheet. He had said quietly, "Excuse me," and walked out. His assistant had followed him to the elevator with a tablet and an expression she was working hard to keep neutral. He told her to cancel the afternoon. She asked if everything was all right. He said yes, which they both understood wasn't an answer to the question. He walked down Burrard in the rain without an umbrella, which was the kind of thing he never did. He walked without a direction, which was also the kind of thing he never did. He had been walking for 11 blocks before he felt, more than smelled, the coffee. The cafe was called Strand and Stone. He'd sat before. It occupied the ground floor of a converted heritage building in Gastown, one of those long, narrow rooms with exposed brick and pendant lights and a menu written on chalkboards. He'd never gone in. He was not a Gastown on a Tuesday person. He pushed the door open anyway. The warmth hit him first, then the sound, low music, the comfortable hum of an afternoon rush, the specific industry of a room full of people choosing to be somewhere. Colton stood in the entrance and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something almost like rest. Then he saw her. She was at a table near the window, her back half turned to him, dark hair, still cut the same way, pulled back at the nape, the way she wore it between shifts, the blue of her jacket, the angle of her shoulders, that particular, deliberate straightness that was completely Leila. The posture of a woman who had decided years ago that the world would not catch her slouching. She was leaning over the table, saying something to the person across from her. Not a person, two. Two small children in wooden high chairs, side by side, the chairs pushed close together, the way you push chairs together for people who belong next to each other. A boy and a girl, both with dark hair, both with the round, watchful faces of children who were paying full attention to the world. The boy was looking directly at Colton. Colton's feet stopped moving. He was standing in the entrance of a cafe in Gastown on a gray Tuesday in October, and the boy, across the room, was looking at him with a pair of dark eyes that Colton had seen in his own reflection every morning for 38 years. He did not move for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then Leila straightened up, reached for something on the table, and turned just far enough to see the entrance. Their eyes met. The color went out of her face, not slowly, completely, all at once, the way color drains from things when the light changes, and Colton's first instinct, older than any decision he could have made, was to step forward. The same instinct that had made him cross rooms toward her for 6 years. "You're not going to fall, I'm here." She didn't fall. Leila Montrose had never fallen in her life. What she did was put both hands flat on the table, one on each side of the children's trays, and look at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not anger, not grief. Something older and steadier than either. The look of someone who has rehearsed a moment for a very long time, and is only now discovering whether the rehearsal was enough. He crossed the cafe. "Leila." Her chin came up a degree. "Colton." He looked at the children. The girl had turned at the sound of his voice and was watching him with a wide, evaluating look and a smear of something chocolate on her chin. The boy had not looked away since Colton entered. He was still watching, not with suspicion exactly, but with the focused and unrushed attention of someone who takes his time before deciding what to think. "How old are they?" Colton said. Not a question, the words came out the way facts come out, flat, necessary. "Colton." "How old?" Leila's jaw set. He knew that jaw. He had loved that jaw, the specific angle of it when she'd made a decision and intended to hold it. 3, she said. "They'll be 4 in February." February, the math arrived in his mind before he could choose not to do it. February. Conceived? He stopped. He knew the month. Because it had been the last good month, the last one before the distance between them widened into something neither of them named until the papers arrived, and it had a name: irreconcilable differences. "You were pregnant when you left." Leila said nothing. "You were pregnant and you didn't." He stopped. He looked at the children. Again, the girl had lost interest in him and was focused on demolishing a shortbread cookie with great concentration. The boy was still watching, still waiting. "What are their names?" Colton said. A long pause. "Archer," Leila said quietly. She nodded toward the boy, "and Clara." The girl looked up at her name and grinned at Colton with a totality of openness that hit him like something physical. It was entirely Leila, that grin, the same reckless warmth, the same complete absence of calculation. "Archer and Clara," Colton repeated. His children had names, names he hadn't chosen, hadn't sat up at midnight, arguing over with his wife, names that had been given in his absence by a woman who had faced the full impossible weight of it without him. His children had names and 3 years of history, and inside jokes he didn't know, and a mother who had done everything, alone because she'd been given a reason to believe she had to. "I need you to come outside with me," he said. "I'm not taking them out in the cold in the middle of lunch." "Leila." "Sit down." Her voice was quiet, but absolute. "Sit down, order something, and be a calm adult, in front of 2 3-year-olds who have no context for whatever is happening right now. Or you can leave. Those are the options." Colton looked at her. He had resources that could flatten most obstacles. He had a name in this city that opened doors that were supposed to stay closed. He could make one call and have the machinery of a serious law firm in motion before the end of the afternoon. He pulled out the empty chair and sat down. There was a silence. Clara offered him a piece of her shortbread with the complete generosity of someone who believes sharing is simply what you do, and Archer continued his evaluation, and Leila picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands. "He gets that from you," Leila said quietly, nodding at Archer, "the way he watches people before he decides." Colton looked at his son. My legal team calls it due diligence. Something flickered in Leila's expression. Not a smile. The ghost of one. There and gone before either of them could acknowledge it. The memory of a shared frequency they used to operate on, a register where a certain kind of dry remark landed exactly right. Then her eyes went flat again, and the wall came back up, and they were two people in a cafe in Gastown, with 3.5 years of silence between them and a reckoning that had barely begun. He ordered a coffee he barely touched. He watched Leila feed Clara and negotiate Archer's position that he had been given insufficient shortbread, given that he had finished all his soup. Archer made this argument without raising his voice, presenting evidence in an orderly fashion, listening to the counter-arguments with the patience of someone fully confident in his position. He sounds like me, Colton thought, and the thought moved through him like something sharp. After an hour, Leila paid. She put her hand over the bill before he could reach it. A no that wasn't even a discussion, and began gathering coats and hats with the efficient ease of someone who has performed this operation thousands of times. On the sidewalk, the rain had stopped. Clara wanted to be carried, and Leila hoisted her to her hip without breaking stride. Archer stood beside them with his hands in his pockets, watching Colton. Where do you live? Colton said. Colton, I'm not asking to show up unannounced. I need to. He stopped. He needed to know they were within reach. He needed to be able to picture the street, the building, the window where they slept and woke and grew without him. I need to understand what I've missed. Leila looked at him for a long moment. Clara was patting Leila's cheek absent-mindedly, the instinctive affection of a child entirely at home in a parent's arms. Archer was watching the exchange with those patient, careful eyes, reading the space between the two adults with the directness children have before they learn that certain things are not their business. 14 blocks east, Leila said finally. We've been there since they were 8 months old. 14 blocks. For 3.5 years, Colton had been 14 blocks from his children. He had walked these streets. He had walked past their neighborhood, past whatever park they went to on Saturday mornings, without knowing they existed. I'm going to call a family lawyer, he said. Not, he held up a hand at the way her body went rigid. Not adversarially. I need a paternity acknowledgement. I need the legal record, not because I doubt them. He looked at Archer, at the precise mathematical certainty of that face. I don't doubt. But whatever comes next needs to be built on something solid. And what comes next, Colton? I don't know yet, he said. But it involves being in their lives, it has to. She looked at him for a long time. Archer had slipped his hand into Leila's free one without being asked. Thursday, Leila said at last. Come Thursday evening. 1 hour. My apartment. My rules. You meet them properly. Agreed. And Colton. She shifted Clara to her other hip and held his gaze with something very direct. Before Thursday, decide what kind of man you're going to be for them, because they don't need a tech company or a Bird Street office. They need someone who shows up. The second you choose the board over a Thursday evening, I will fight you with everything I have. I've been fighting for them alone for 3.5 years, and I won't stop. Colton thought about the board meeting he'd walked out of 2 hours ago. About the 17 unanswered messages on his phone. About the 2 subsidiaries, and the pending acquisition and the quarterly investor call, and the entire architecture of a professional life that had never once let him walk away from a room without consequence. He thought about a small boy who had watched a stranger walk into a cafe and spent 40 minutes assessing him without reaching a verdict, reserving judgment, not from cold distance, but from the understanding that some things deserve time. He thought about a girl who had offered him a piece of her cookie without knowing anything about him, simply because it seemed like the right thing to do. He thought about 14 blocks. I'll be there Thursday, he said. Leila nodded once. She turned and walked with the children, Archer matching her stride, Clara waving at Colton from over Leila's shoulder, with the total cheerful uncalculation of a child who has not yet learned to wonder whether a wave will be returned. Colton stood on the wet sidewalk and watched them until they turned the corner. Then he took out his phone and called his assistant. "Clear Thursday evening and get me the name of a family law specialist. Not corporate, family and paternity. Someone good." A pause. "Is everything all right?" Colton looked at the corner where they had disappeared. "It's going to be," he said. He stood there a moment longer. Then he walked 14 blocks east. He found the street, found the building, a well-kept mid-rise in Mount Pleasant with bikes locked to the rack, out front and window boxes on the second floor. He stood on the opposite sidewalk and looked up at it for a long time. Somewhere in those lit windows, 2 children with his eyes were finishing their afternoon and doing whatever nearly 4-year-olds do when no one is measuring them. Becoming people he had not had the privilege of watching become. Something cold and careful began to form at the back of his mind on the walk back, not yet a conclusion, not yet an accusation, but the shape of a question he would not be able to leave alone. Why had Leila left? Not the official answer, not the irreconcilable differences of the paperwork. He knew Leila. He had known Leila the way you know someone when you have shared a bed and a grocery list and every ordinary version of a life with them for 6 years. And Leila Montrose was not the kind of woman who walked away from things she believed in. She stayed. She held on. She was the person who showed up. She had believed in them. He had been careless with that belief, let his hours and his ambition erode it. But she had believed. He had been sure of that. And the only thing in the world that would have made her sign those papers and disappear was if someone had given her a reason to believe that staying was worse than leaving. He already had a feeling who. Thursday came, and Leila met him at the apartment door before he could knock. He was a friend from a long time ago. Nothing more, not yet. He agreed, without argument. They had agreed on this in a brief, careful text exchange, the kind 2 people write when they are trying very hard to be civilized about something that is not civilized at all. The apartment was alive in the way of a space containing 2 small children. Toys on the rug, drawings on the refrigerator, the smell of something baking, the sound of a cartoon playing in the back room. Colton stood in the entrance and absorbed all of it, and felt the full weight of everything he had not been present for. Archer appeared first, walking with a kind of contained purposefulness. He stopped when he saw Colton, and the evaluation began again immediately. "You came back," Archer said. "I said I would." A pause, the length of someone considering whether this was sufficient data. "Mama said you're an old friend." "That's right." "From before." "Yes." Another pause. Then Archer turned down the hallway and announced, with the neutral professionalism of a building concierge, "He's here," and returned to whatever he'd been doing, apparently satisfied that his initial responsibilities had been met. Clara arrived at a run. She was carrying a small fistful of painted pebbles. Smooth stones in various sizes with faces or stars or flowers painted on them in careful, considered strokes. She extended them to Colton immediately, all of them, as though the correct response to meeting someone new was to share the most important things you had. "I found these at the beach," she said. "I painted them. This one is a sun, this one is a bear, this one is supposed to be Archer, but he said it didn't look like him." "It doesn't," Archer said from across the room, without looking up. "It has dark hair," Clara said. "So does the bear." Colton sat down on the floor and looked at Clara's rocks with the full attention they were owed, and she narrated each one with the thoroughness of a museum curator, and he listened. And somewhere in the middle of the 4th pebble, a small oval with a slightly lopsided moon, Archer moved his building blocks 6 inches closer to where Colton was sitting. He didn't say anything, he just moved closer. Leila in the kitchen doorway turned back to making tea. The hour became 2. Colton helped Archer construct something. Archer called a bridge, but that was technically more of an arch, and he accepted Archer's structural corrections without defensiveness, which seemed to matter to Archer, in a way that Colton stored and did not comment on. Clara narrated 12 more rocks. A drawing she'd made of the family cat they didn't have, but that she intended eventually to get, and a song she'd invented about a particular cloud that came back every winter. At the door, Leila handed him his jacket. "They like you," she said. "Archer is reserving judgment. Archer reserves judgment on everyone. He reserved judgment on his own birthday cake." The corner of Colton's mouth moved. So did hers. And, for just a few seconds, they were two people who had once found each other's company the most natural thing in the world, standing in a doorway in Vancouver in the fall, almost smiling at the same small thing. Then it was gone. "I want this to be civil," Colton said. "No war. Then we go slowly for them." He met her eyes. "Leila, the reason you left, I know it wasn't just the distance. I know that wasn't all of it." He watched her breath shift, just barely. "We need to talk about it. Not tonight, but soon." She held his gaze a long moment. Then she nodded once and stepped back and closed the door. He called his mother from the car. Dinah Waverly answered on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. "Colton, finally, I've been trying to reach you since Monday." "I know. Your assistant says you walked out of the Harrington presentation." "Mother," his voice dropped to the register he used when a negotiation was about to end. "I need to ask you something. I need you to answer me honestly." A pause. Barely perceptible. When Leila left, she left very suddenly. She was not the kind of woman who left suddenly. She was the kind of woman who stayed and fought, and she didn't, and I always found that strange. He kept his voice very even. "Did you speak to her before the papers were filed? Any contact at all?" A longer silence. "Colton, that was 4 years ago." "Yes or no?" The silence that followed was the longest yet, and in it something in Colton's chest dropped several degrees. Not dramatically, without any visible change in his posture or expression, the way water goes still just before it freezes. "We spoke once or twice," Dinah said carefully. "She came to me, actually. She was unsettled about the hours you were keeping." "What did you show her?" Not a question. His voice had gotten quieter, not louder, quieter and more precise. "I told her the truth, that a man in your position requires a particular kind of—" "What did you show her?" "Colton, you would have. What did you show her the last time?" And Dinah Waverly, who had spent 4 decades as a lawyer, knowing exactly when a position was indefensible, said nothing. Colton stood up from the couch. He was standing in his Kitsilano apartment, and the lights of Vancouver were spread across the dark outside his windows, and the mountains to the north were black shapes against the sky. And he felt for the first time in his adult life something that had no strategic value and no productive use, and was present in him anyway, like a cold and total tide. "I have 2 children," he said, very quietly. "My son is 3 years old, and he takes his time trusting people, because the world he grew up in taught him that not everyone who arrives is going to stay. My daughter gives her most important things to strangers because her mother raised her in a household where generosity was not a privilege. It was simply how you survived a world that hadn't given you enough." His voice did not shake. He would not let it shake. 4 years. You decided 4 years was. "Colton." "Don't call me," he said. "Not tonight. Don't contact Leila. Don't contact the children." He ended the call. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor with his back against the couch and put his head back and closed his eyes. He called Leila at 9 o'clock. She answered in the measured voice of someone who had been expecting this call without knowing when it would come. "I talked to my mother tonight," he said. A silence. "I see. Tell me what she showed you. I need to hear it from you." He could hear her breathing. He could hear the quiet of an apartment where 2 children were asleep. "Come over," she said. "The kids are down. Come now." She met him at the door in the same blue sweater. They sat at the kitchen table with water. Not wine, not coffee, just water, the drink of people who need to be entirely clear. And she told him. The emails, the photographs. A letter in his handwriting. Or something so close to his handwriting that she had stared at it for an hour trying to find a single stroke that wasn't his and hadn't been able to. A letter that said he had never intended the marriage to last, that she was a chapter, that he was waiting for the right moment to close it. Dinah had delivered the other message as plainly. If Leila stayed and fought, the Waverly lawyers would make sure there was nothing left of her on the other side. No settlement, no support, nothing. She had been 10 weeks pregnant, student debt, working back-to-back shifts, facing a woman with every resource necessary to make those threats real. So I left, Leila said. She held her glass with both hands. I left because I decided my child. I didn't know there were two yet. I found that out at 12 weeks, was not going to grow up inside a war with those resources on one side and me on the other. Colton was quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology, he said. Not for what she did, for what I did before any of it. You were working back-to-back shifts, and I was told myself you understood, that you were patient, that there would be more time. I didn't give you more time. I gave you my absence and called it ambition. He looked at his hands. What my mother did. She walked through a door I had already cracked open. The kitchen was very still. Leila set her glass down. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face since before everything went wrong. Not love, not yet. Nothing as simple or as dangerous as that. But the look of a woman who has heard the things she needed to hear, and is choosing, carefully and deliberately, not to let that change everything at once. Because she is smarter now than she was at 29. Because she knows that words are not the same as change, and she has learned the difference at considerable cost. Saturday mornings, she said, they have a routine. Waffles, then the park near the water. You could come, Saturday. A pause, not as their father yet, as someone learning the routine. If you can commit to the ordinary Saturdays, the waffles and the park, and the boring, repetitive, unremarkable Saturdays, then we talk about what comes next. I'll be there Saturday, he said. 7:30. 7, she said, because Clara is up at 6:30 regardless, and by 7 the waffle situation has already begun. He was there at 7 o'clock. He had been awake since 5. He had stood in his closet for longer than he had ever stood in a closet. Because every suit he owned was the wrong thing, and he didn't own anything that wasn't a suit. He finally put on dark jeans and a gray Henley that had been unworn in a drawer for 2 years, cut the tag off with his keys in the elevator going down, and arrived at the door with nothing except himself, which was both the simplest and the most frightening thing he had brought anywhere in years. The waffle process was organized chaos. Clara had decided the batter needed considerably more vanilla than the recipe specified, and made this case with polished rhetoric. Archer had a system for topping placement that Clara was not observing, and he expressed this concern with the contained frustration of a person who has learned that yelling doesn't work but hasn't stopped hoping that precision will. Colton got on the floor with the measuring cups and let Clara supervise him, and she narrated every step with the seriousness of a head chef, and at some point Archer set his system aside and came to crouch beside them and correct a measurement without being asked. He didn't say anything to Colton, he just fixed it and went back to his side of the counter. But he was closer now, 6 inches closer than before. At the park, Clara found 2 new pebbles and put them in her coat pocket for painting later, narrating their potential to Colton as though he were a necessary witness to their discovery. Archer went to the water's edge and stood looking at the inlet with his hands in his pockets, and Colton went and stood beside him without being invited, and they looked at the water together. A great blue heron was standing motionless in the shallows about 20 meters out. He's been there since we arrived, Archer said after a while. He's patient, Colton said. He's waiting. Archer watched the bird with full attention. For the right moment. He knows the fish are there. He knows if he moves too fast, he'll lose it. A pause. He won't move until the moment is right. Colton looked at his son. No, he said, he won't. Archer turned then and looked at him directly, with the full weight of those dark, evaluating eyes. Are you going to keep coming on Saturdays? Yes. Even when the company needs you. I'll still be here. Archer held the look for another moment. Then he turned back to the heron. 2 minutes later, he moved 4 inches closer on the bank, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. By the 5th Saturday, Clara ran to the door when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. By the 6th, Archer showed Colton a small notebook, ruled pages in careful handwriting, a record. He called his field notes, observations about weather patterns, birds he'd identified, and what he described as things people do when they don't know anyone is watching. He shared this with no one. He handed it to Colton on a Sunday afternoon while Clara was napping, held it out with both hands with the gravity of someone transferring a significant responsibility. Colton read every entry. He did not comment on anything Archer did not invite comment on. He handed it back. "Thank you," Colton said. Archer tucked the notebook under his arm and went down the hallway. He paused at the door. "You can read it again," he said, "if you want." They told the children on a Saturday in January, at the kitchen table before the park. Colton said what needed to be said, that he was their father, that he had not known about them, and the moment he found out, he had come as fast as he could, and he was not leaving. Clara said, with the total uncomplicated certainty of a child who has simply confirmed what she already suspected, "I knew you were nice enough to be a dad." She climbed off her chair and into his lap and picked up her fork and kept eating, because the appropriate response to important news was to continue the meal. Archer did not move for a moment. He looked at the table. He looked at Colton. He looked at Leila. "I thought it might be something like that," he said quietly. "You did?" Leila said. "You look at him like he's yours," Archer said simply, "even when you're trying not to." Leila turned to get something from the counter. Archer reached across the table and picked up the syrup and set it carefully in front of Colton's plate. "You can have some," he said. "I don't mind sharing it with you." Colton took the syrup. His hand was not entirely steady. He poured it on a waffle he'd already finished and set the bottle down, and Archer watched the whole thing without expression. Then something in his face settled, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the specific quality of a child who has updated his assessment based on new information and found the new information acceptable. "Okay," Archer said and went back to his breakfast. At the park that afternoon, Clara called him Dad for the first time, while pointing at a Stellar's jay on a branch above them, and Colton stopped walking for 2 full seconds before he recovered. Archer stood at the water's edge, watching the inlet. "The heron's back," he said. "I see him," Colton said. "He got a fish last week. I was here, and I watched it. He waited the whole morning, and then the moment was there, and he didn't hesitate." Archer was quiet for a moment. "I thought about what you said, about waiting for the right moment." Colton looked at his son. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "not this Saturday or any other one." Archer watched the heron for another moment. Then he leaned against Colton's arm. Not quite a hug, not a hug, and they stood together in the January cold while the heron held still over the gray water, patient as anything, and the mountains above the city were dusted with new snow, and the inlet moved, slow and silver, between them and the far shore. Leila, 20 feet back, was watching them. When Colton looked over, she held his gaze this time. She didn't look away first. She let him see what was in her face, which was complicated and careful and running deeper than a single afternoon in January could hold, but it was there. The first atom of it, growing the way things grow when they've been given enough ordinary Saturdays, enough evidence and enough time. She didn't put the wall all the way back up. And in the particular language of Leila Montrose, that was everything.